Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and we're going to have a really important discussion today. I have been watching the TV and the vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, and it seems to be, at a standstill right now. And Elena ran as a Republican for the House and a House seat in Michigan. So, Elena Oelke, if you were in the House chamber right now, what do you think's going on, and how would you vote?
It's a loaded question, Cynthia, but I'm up to the challenge. Yes, I did run for Congress on a Republican ticket in the Republican primary in 2020 election. So I do have a little bit of an insight of how things work. Of course, being in Republican caucus over there, in actual Congress, where Kevin McCarthy and the rebels, the revolutionaries, are now having this debacle over the next speakership position, we do know that there are a lot of backroom door deals. So I am sure I'm not privy to all of the deals and all of the grievances that each one have expressed, but I do know that there are a few. And of course, if I was down there, I would definitely look at both sides and see what each side is proposing, what the benefit would be to American taxpayers, to my constituents, from supporting either side, because obviously I want what the best for my constituents and the best for the way to represent my constituents, if that I was there this time. And I believe that Matt Gaetz, one of the 20 revolutionaries who decided not to vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, he actually did say in his press conference that this is a driving motivation behind their withholding their votes for Kevin McCarthy, because they feel that the rules in the procedures package that Kevin McCarthy has proposed is basically not allowing them to serve their constituents to the best of their ability, and not making the Congress the equal and the best place for them to participate in the process as lawmakers. Some of the problems that they found was that initially, Kevin McCarthy did not agree to put up for vote term limits. They proposed in the first quarter of the new Congress to put the vote for the South border crisis, for the term limits. They also proposed the motion to vacate the chair, which would be the motion to dismiss the speaker, to be made by just one member of Congress. Nancy Pelosi changed that rule, and Republicans adopted the rules that half of the conference would have to agree in order for this motion to be made. But Matt Gaetz, one of the rebels, again, the congressman from Florida, he said that they would prefer, instead of, pardon my words, instead of the compromise that was reached, 5 members of Congress, they would prefer to have one member of Congress to be able to make that motion to dismiss the chair. So they had a number of different grievances, but this morning I read that some of these, actually, the concessions were met by Kevin McCarthy. There is also a discussion, and there is backroom door deals between different PACs. There is a big PAC called Conservative Republican Leadership Fund, and they have agreed last night in a late hour after the 6th vote that Kevin McCarthy still didn't get the speaker position and kept losing votes, vote after vote. But late in the wee hour last night, there was a compromise that was reached between Conservative Leadership Fund, which is a PAC that Kevin McCarthy and sponsors Republican candidates, and the, I believe, the revolutionaries. Some of them are the members of what they call a Freedom Caucus in Congress. And that is very influenced by what they call a Club for Growth, which is another PAC that sponsors. So they've reached a compromise that Conservative Leadership Fund will not finance the candidates in the open seat primaries in what they call safe Republican districts. And of course, this morning there was a commentary about that of course this is not really all that significant because it's, somebody commented that it's not enforceable because of course Conservative Leadership Fund may fund other ways to finance candidates. So they have a variety of points. One of the rebels, I believe it was Andy Biggs, the congressman, he demanded that the Capitol's access to public be restored, that public could access Capitol. So there is a long list of different grievances. And again, we don't know all of them, but we know that initially the rebels basically rallied around Jim Jordan, who is also a member of Freedom Caucus. And Jim Jordan, surprisingly himself, supports Kevin McCarthy. So after being written in a few times on the ballot, Jim Jordan came out and said, I don't have any interest to be a House Speaker. I want to be a Judiciary Committee chair, which is Judiciary Committee is being now formed. And the rebel faction were trying to make sure that there is also subcommittees so they could actually investigate some of this weaponization of government and variety of collusions and the elections and how the people from the government involve social media and to silence Americans, to censor their speech. So it's a variety of different issues that was brought up, and sounds like some of the compromises have been reached. In the interim, the rebels proposed a new congressman, he's newer congressman, Byron Donalds from Florida, to become a speaker. And Byron Donalds gave a quick interview and said, well, I voted for myself. And he said, I don't mind, I've been nominated, why wouldn't I? But the press asked him, aren't you afraid of retribution? In case Kevin McCarthy does win, what would be retribution for you to join a rebellious group of 20 and vote against him? And he basically said this, and I think that was very important. He said, I have been a congressman here walking from building to building. And I spend a lot of times away from my wife, away from my children. And I actually, he said, find this invigorating. So he found that this a bit of a debacle and this negotiation for what appears to be the betterment of the rules according to the ones who are challenging Kevin McCarthy, in order for the process in Congress to work more fairly for every congressman, to be allowed to hold positions at the different committees, and to widen the scope of who is allowed, because obviously the rules right now are pretty much inherited from Nancy Pelosi. And Matt Gaetz, one of the revolutionaries, said that he doesn't see the difference between Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, who represents, again, California delegation in Congress. And he actually likened having Kevin McCarthy as putting an alligator in charge of draining a swamp. So they have a variety of different, different issues, including the one mentioned that Republican rebels, the group of 20, the group grew from 18, I believe, to 20 after 6 rounds of vote. They basically said that they have trust issues, and they happen to not trust Kevin McCarthy, and that he will put the same set that needed up for the vote on the floor. So put it this way, if I was there, I would definitely look at both sides, and I would not be blindly supporting one faction or the other, because in the end of the day, it's what's best for American people. It's what's best for my constituents. And I know that Donald Trump, in surprise move, at first said he is neutral on the issue, said, let's see what happens. But then Kevin McCarthy kept alleging that Trump gives his full support to Kevin McCarthy. In surprise move, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who usually flocks with the Matt Gaetz faction and the Freedom Caucus faction, and they agree on a lot of issues. In surprise move, she actually called them distractionists and said that they have to stop doing this and we need to elect Kevin McCarthy. So Elon Musk came out and said he supports Kevin McCarthy. So this issue has been all over. Everybody took a side, and we'll see what happens because they are voting today. After it was announced that they reached some concessions this morning at noon, there will be another vote, seventh round. So we'll see what happens.
So do you think all this airing of grievances is healthy for
I
Congress?
believe so. I believe so, Cynthia. Okay. And I know that a lot of people believe that as well. Not everybody is able or has courage to say that, because people, the main concern was that if it keeps going longer, that maybe then the vote will be put up to what they call, I believe, plurality, or something along the lines when then maybe Democrats will be able to win the House Speaker. That a lot of people were cautioning the revolutionary faction not to drag it along because this may happen, and everybody was concerned, and so am I, as somebody who ran on the Republican ticket. But on the other hand, yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene said that don't play Russian roulette, she said to the revolutionaries, with our hard-earned speakership position. And yes, it is. In the press asked Matt Gaetz, why did they make it the last minute? And Matt Gaetz said it wasn't last minute. They actually had negotiated for a while already. And it's unfortunate that it just seemed like it came down to the last hour. Obviously, these differences should have been ironed before, because essentially we don't have government. Congress cannot get seated. Things cannot get done. Rules cannot be adopted. The new members cannot be sworn in. A lot of people are worried what's going to happen. Yes, it basically does say that some of the congressmen, in fact, Matt Gaetz actually said that we don't want to be anymore the part of what he called the uni party. Means that both parties basically get along to go along, or go along to get along. And he said that the fact that they are demanding these changes basically signals that Washington is broken. And he quoted, I believe Kevin McCarthy himself admitted that Washington is broken. In other words, it seems like internal struggle between congressmen and for the rules for their voices to be heard, and procedures that would allow for their representation of their constituents in a better, more, you would think, democratic way. Because as we know, there are hierarchy appoints in Congress. If you're a junior congressman, then you don't have a lot of, what they call weight. And if you're a senior, you get better positions on better committees, or you have your choices, which I don't believe this should be a case, because each one of us Congress people should be equally able and capable of representing our constituents. Instead of having this hierarchy of who is a senior, who is a junior. But unfortunately, that's the reality of Congress. And I think that's one of the grievances of the guys who basically created this revolutionary move, is that positions on committees. And I think one of the concessions, now they're getting 2 more seats in one of the committees. Apparently, Kevin McCarthy agreed to that from the Freedom Caucus representatives. So it's a very long and complicated list. I'm sure that we don't know half of what they're negotiating, but I definitely think that it's healthy. And I think it's helpful because in the end of the day, Kevin McCarthy agreed, and it didn't state when, but they were requesting in the first quarter of a new Congress the term limits bill. And apparently, from what I read in Breitbart News this morning, supposedly that's what one of the things that he agreed to. I believe we need term limits in Congress. That was one of the platform points that when I ran, because we have these people in Congress sitting there for 30, 50 years, and that's just becoming insane. We never have any new people, new ideas. And I believe that that was healthy. And I would be actually looking forward to see if they do put up for vote a term limits bill and see how that plays out in Congress.
Diane, I had heard just on Jimmy Dore's show that what's happening to Kevin McCarthy happened to Nancy Pelosi a couple of years ago when the squad kind of like tried to force their way, and and the mainstream media is trying to portray the Democrats as, in unison, and the Republicans are in disarray, when what Jimmy Dore said is just the opposite. So here we have two parties that are, not doing very well, and for a third party or a fourth party or whatever, they're shut out. How long can this go on?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a great deal of illusion and delusion about what happens in Washington. As Elena said, we probably don't know even the tip of the iceberg about what they're discussing. Yes. And I do think it's good that there is a brawl. And it appears to me that on the major issues, which none of these people are bringing up, which I think really is the problem, like whether we're going to have a nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine or China over Taiwan, and what we're going to do about the blowout of the financial system and the hyperinflation that we're experiencing. Somehow, these very life and death issues don't seem to make it into the debate, although I think they are on the top of minds of the American people. The Democrats, unfortunately, have been completely lockstep. Every single Democrat has voted for every major funding package of weapons to Ukraine. They're totally unified. Schumer's job, pulling them all together on this fraudulent, whatever it's called, the Inflation Reduction Act or whatever, which is just complete nonsense and gives very little funding to things that will actually increase the productivity of the country, and gives massive amount of funding to so-called green energy boondoggles and other things. You see them very unified. I'm happy to see there is such a fight, but I think it's lacking in principle. I find it interesting what Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying, because she is someone, for example, who stood up repeatedly against funding this war. I don't know what Paul Gosar is doing. He also has been rather outspoken in a useful way. In fact, even offered Arizona as a place for peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. I think the American people cannot use this as an excuse to further remove themselves from politics. I find it interesting that one of the points is to restore access to the Capitol again. I think part of the way January 6th has been covered is to create a pretext where, I don't know if you're aware of this, Cynthia, I don't know if we've discussed it, but as you know, it used to be the case that if you were with an organization or you had something you wanted to raise, you could go to Washington and you could go door to door and you could visit your whole congressional district or congressional delegation.
Right.
Now, you are not allowed to enter those buildings. You cannot enter those buildings unless you have a specific appointment with one office. And it's very hard to get these appointments. That you go through 6 layers of bureaucracy. You call and they say email so-and-so, and then you have to wait for so-and-so to email you back. And then, I mean, it is not meant, somehow the access of the people to their government, which is supposed to represent them, has been greatly curtailed. Obviously, you can still go to your congressman's office in your district, but if I'm from New York and I want to see all 26 of my congressmen, it's much more efficient to go to DC and walk down the halls and visit them all, which you can't do anymore. So I think there should be a fight. We have major, major life and death problems facing the American people. If our Congress were not having a brawl, then we would be in much worse shape. That being said, I think that the level of debate is somewhat lower than I would hope it would be on these issues. And I think the people have to have faith that they have a voice and they have to use it.
Dennis, what do you think?
Well, I'll just say a couple of short things here, I think important. In 1932, when the Democratic Party was nominating its presidential candidate, it took 4 ballots before Franklin Delano Roosevelt became the Democratic presidential candidate. Nobody talks about the colossal failure of Roosevelt to get nominated on the first ballot or the second ballot or the third ballot. The fact that someone is not accepted after 6 ballots, well, yes, you can say that shows that they're clearly not a person that people want in some sense. But really, the way that the media has been stating that this is humiliating because the number of ballots occur is itself offensive. What is happening here is that well-known disputes that have been going on in American politics in many different ways and have surfaced for the past 4 years are not being allowed to be sidelined. Actually, the squad, the progressives in the case of the Democratic Party, did the exact opposite. They made a lot of noise, they squawked, but they folded.
Mm-hmm.
They were supposed to support the issue of universal health care. They didn't do that. They didn't even hold the line on price caps on, medical, prescriptions. So what we're seeing here is a more, well, let's put it this way. It shows you what you can do. There's another element, which is that the most important thing about Washington and these elections is the obscene amount of money being spent and the degree to which many of the people in the Congress are bought by lobbies. So, and I'm not suggesting that that's not even in play here in other ways. I mean, for example, whatever you think of Elon Musk, he has been a supporter of Kevin McCarthy for a long time. He's actually given him more money than any other person in Congress. So it's not a surprise, really, that he's saying what he's saying. But what is important is that McCarthy is sweating. And what's relevant is not him. What's relevant is the institutions of power are noticing that there are constituents and sections and factions of our society that are being represented by people, no matter what you think of the issues. I'm saying this for a different reason, because you see, this has been the problem in the United States in the past several electoral cycles. This is why a lot of people don't vote. And it's also why there are record numbers of people who are registered independent. The two parties are not considered by the majority of the American people to be what they want. They merely tolerate the parties. They have to. They've got to vote some way. And their view is that independent candidates can't win because there's too much money, too much power, and too much opposition. But in fact, independent candidacies that would put forward real policy and fight are going to have a new day in America. Maybe they'll have a first day in America, some people might say. Diane, of course, is running as an independent. And now I'm not against people running as a Republican or Democrat. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that probably the biggest and most important takeaway of what's going on in Washington today And Diane's point concerning the access to Washington is right to the point. Most of America would not even be interested right now in going to Washington after what was done to people on January 6th. You know, a lot of the people that went to Washington January 6th had never been there. They were not the usual demonstrator crowd. They hadn't been on protests. They, you know, a lot of them, and that's exactly why, as one can see, if one looks at some of the video coverage, a lot of people are just there. They think they're led into the Capitol. They're taking pictures. They're happy. The notion that what was said to have occurred that day occurred, you know, that's one of the more bizarre discussions in American history. But you see why. You see why right now and what you see going on there in the Congress. And so I think it's important to see that what you're seeing is actually the canary in the coal mine. It's where we're going in America. You're about to see upheaval of that becomes the norm. And I think that is very, very good.
Diane, one of the things that was said when the Republicans won the majority in the House, that there was going to be investigations. There were going to be investigations of the Ukrainian country, that the Ukrainian company that Hunter Biden was involved in, and all sorts of stuff. And if Kevin McCarthy does not pull this off, and there is not another Republican that emerges, and it becomes Jeffries who wins the speakership, and we know that Jeffries is a Democrat. Therefore, if Jeffries became the speaker, all this talk of investigations would be thrown out the window. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if the talk of investigations would be thrown out the window, and the Republicans still would have the majority, but obviously it would make it extremely difficult. I think that's one of the reasons why Marjorie Taylor Greene decided to support McCarthy. I mean, she's very committed to getting some of these investigations, particularly as Rand Paul suggested in the Senate, an inspector general. Where did all this money to Ukraine go? Ukraine is known as being the most corrupt government in Europe, if not the whole world at this point. So why are we sending them so much money, and where is it going, and where are these weapons going? These are all legitimate questions. So it would definitely be a terrible obstacle if that were to occur. I hope that's not the design. I think the corruption and the deal making, and as Dennis mentioned, the money from the lobbyists has far more of an influence than it should. I saw here in New York State, the Democrat and Republican Party working completely hand in glove to suppress independent candidacies. I am aware of the close collaboration between the Conservative Party and the Working Families Party. So all of these things that people say, oh no, and letting yourself vote by party or do things by party, you have to realize that at a certain level, you discover both sides are run by the same entity. That's why these mega corporations like Sam Bankman-Fried's FTX, they weren't merely funding Democrats. They gave a lot of money to Democrats, but they gave a lot of money to Republicans. So if you're a big player and you want to make sure you control the policy, you don't just give money to one side, you give it to both sides and you get your policy through. And I think that's really what the American people are so sick of. But if they're sick of it, then they have to get out there. They have to do something about it. And the reason I brought up earlier this example from 1992 of how Oliver Stone's film about the JFK assassination led to the Congress making a law that the files had to be released shows you the power of the American people. That is, the people can be mobilized. They can demand something if it's important to them, and the government can, at least the Congress can be made to respond. That's probably one of the reasons why they want to limit people's access to them. So you're right. The Hakeem Jeffries thing would be a mess. And is that the intent? I don't know.
So today is Thursday, the 5th of January. In 15 minutes, there's going to be another vote for House Speaker, and I want to listen to that. So we have just about 15 more minutes to give final thoughts. Let's start with Dennis.
Okay, I would say this. You asked about the investigations. I'll put it this way. We know that President Donald Trump wanted to release all of the Kennedy files. We know that CIA Director Mike Pompeo said, bad idea, don't do it, and urged the president not to do it. And eventually the president did not do it. We know this. We also know that the issue of Russiagate has been continually avoided, although, and of course, the Democratic Party very much supported the theory of Russiagate. We also know we have other matters, such as the Twitter matter that's before us right now, as to what, in fact, was done by the Democratic Party. People like Adam Schiff, for example, being able to directly select individuals that he wanted to have surveilled by Twitter. These things are now coming out today and yesterday in Matt Taibbi's releases. We know about the case of Julian Assange and the fact that it was Hillary Clinton, among other people, but Hillary Clinton specifically, who wanted to see Assange, some people say dead, some people say certainly apprehended. Can these matters be more forthrightly brought up in a Congress which has had this fight we've just seen? The answer is yes. The reason that we may actually get to the bottom of some of these things is because of the kind of thing we're seeing in this fight. Now, the element that has to be added in is you got to have real policy. So we have to, for example, have a fight right now about Ukraine. We had $100 billion go to Ukraine, which is bigger than the entire Russian military budget. But the truth of the matter is, if you talk to Scott Ritter or you talk to Colonel McGregor or Douglas McGregor or others, the expectation is that that's going to be lost. And whether or not so we're looking at a situation in which debate in the United States of a fundamental variety in nature has to begin. And it's just as well that it happened and begin on the floor of the Congress, as we've just seen.
Diane?
Well, I think we're at the beginning of a new year. And I think that we should resolve that there will be major dramatic changes in this year, because I think there is a risk that we may not survive if we don't make these changes. So I see this fight. I agree with Dennis. I think it bodes well. If we were in the kind of crisis we are in and there were no opposition and no one rising to object at the risk of being called names. And that's another thing I'd like to say, in this era of social media, everyone is so sensitive about what you supposedly look like or what name you're being called, and you're being attacked or called names by a bunch of bots that aren't even real people. So I think people should forget about that concern and fight for the truth and fight for true principles. That the number one principle is that human beings are unique and distinct from the animals, and that every single human life is sacred, and that every nation has to, in its own way, its own culture, uphold that principle, and that we have to work together among nations to defend that principle of human life, human beings, human life. I think human beings, this goes against many people, are fundamentally good, but we have to fight for people to have the opportunity to develop that goodness, to develop their talent. So I think this year has to be the year of that change. I think all of us participating here today are committed to that, and hopefully many more people, and that more people are going to find the courage, dare to be unpopular, tell the truth, be in the minority, and I think you might discover that you're not really in the minority after all.
Diane, I wanna hold your feet to the fire on one thing you said. According to Scott Ritter, we're 1 second away from doomsday. And in the catastrophic event that would happen, you're talking not only human life, you're talking dogs, cats, birds, whatever species, they're gonna be annihilated also. So I think this is other forms of life is as important as humans. Would you agree? You have a brand new puppy.
I do, and dogs are near and dear to my heart. But actually, no, I don't agree. I think that humans, because we are creative, we have a responsibility to protect the lives of other creatures, and we can improve their lives. But I can't say equally important, because a human being can actually save the lives of everything else. An elephant, while being probably a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for, nonetheless, an elephant is not going to be able to save the entire planet. So that that puts us in a different category.
Elena, final thoughts from you.
Final thoughts. I thought Diane made a good point about nobody is talking about money to Ukraine, and if that's a top priority for Congress. But the truth of the matter is, Mitch McConnell already on that. He gave an interview a couple of days ago, and he said, new Congress, so what? Money to Ukraine will keep flowing the same way it's flowed before. So there is no change in policy regarding shelling billions of dollars to Ukraine. And therefore, it's not on top of their list to negotiate. No, because they obviously all agree that's not brought up as a contested item. But a couple of contested items that also I thought was worthy of mention was that the rebel congressmen are trying to bring back what they call a Holman rule. That is something that will allow the Congress to defund the government agencies that they deem doing something improperly, sort of like if there was and they defund the salaries of the government employees that are doing some things improperly, or they could decrease the funding up to $1. So something like that. And I'm thinking that that probably ties in with that new investigations that Jim Jordan wants to start on Judiciary Committee, which again talks about the collusion to silence Americans and collusion with big tech and social media and influence over the social media, trying to suppress the stories, trying to basically clear up all the news that we should be as American people be allowed to see and know. But another item is the budget. It's another very important thing that right now Congress has something they call pay as you go. And the rebel congressmen were trying to introduce, so you have pay as you go, but let's do cut as you go, meaning if you increase the spending, let's find the avenues to decrease the spending to balance the budget. So a couple of these things, I think things that they brought up are important. I'm glad that this is a healthy fight. We'll see what happens at 12 at noon. Everybody's guess as good as mine. So far, it kind of looks like Kevin McCarthy might just actually make through this if they keep negotiating and keep getting concessions, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you. You've been listening to Issues That Matter. I've been talking to Diane Sare, Dennis Speed, and Elena Oelke. And we're a few minutes away from the 7th vote. So I want to see that. And maybe after the dust settles, we can all talk about this again. So thanks, everybody, for participating. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day. Happy New Year.